got your attention now, don't I?
This is the Black Rifle Coffee Podcast. Prepare to get caffeinated.
Bryan, welcome to the show, man.
Awesome to be here.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing. Between the two of us, we've known each other for 20 plus years. We actually went to, did you go to Sacagawea or did you go to?
The other
Junior high.
Yeah.
So we went to high school.
Bitter rivals.
Yeah. we went to high school together, believe it or not, folks. This is the first time I think I've had anybody on the show that I went to high school with.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
Congratulations.
Well, thanks. I feel like a big deal now.
So Bryan has an incredible background. One, we were friends in high school. I like to make sure that people know that because Bryan was smart and I was not. So I did have some smart friends.
You were much cooler, and I think you may have had sex with my sister.
That is weird. Absolutely not true. Your sister
Should I mention that? I'm not sure if
your
sister
producer
should edit that out.
I don't think so. I think she probably wouldn't even tell me the time. If I walked by the hall, she would have been like, "Who are you?"
Are you the one that stole her underwear, by the way? She was missing a pair her senior year.
Definitely not, because I would have remembered.
Does your wife listen to this show?
Yeah, she does.
Okay, we'll stop. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. So, Bryan and I have known each other for a long time. You went off, you became, can I say it?
Yes.
Yeah, you became a spy or a case officer
true.
For the Central Intelligence Agency. He and I both worked at the same organization around the same time, and we didn't know it. So how fucking interesting is that? Because I was spending a lot of time in and out of Washington, D.C. I was also in Iraq and Afghanistan for the majority of that time. Bryan was right in the Washington, D.C. area. We were probably walking down some of the same sidewalks, maybe even going in some of the same doors without even knowing each other.
Wild.
Yeah. It was fucking crazy.
You know, you don't realize how small the world is until you're around, particularly in our community, within the military community, intelligence community. It's a very, very small world. But I will say our hometown, 25,000 people in the middle of Idaho, to think that one of your classmates is running around in Langley is pretty weird.
It's so weird. And once I found out, I actually found out because I was watching the news, I think.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's how I found out because I knew that, or I thought you worked for the State Department.
Okay.
And then
wink,
something came up and I was like, this fucking guy. And I think I hit you, I think I hit you up on Twitter or one of those. I was like, dude, are you serious? Like, and so we had kind of a back and forth, like, hey, no shit, you know? So kind of a small world getting smaller because, Lewiston, Idaho is such a small town.
Right.
Pretty much everybody knows each other.
Right.
And then
some of your friends sleep with your sister, for instance.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you, if I was lucky enough, like, boy.
Anyway, sorry, moving on.
Sorry.
I'm still there.
And then we went into another very small organization where there's only, a couple tens of thousands of people over there. Yep. We had no idea. But the thing that I wanted to bring in the show and talk about was not necessarily like reliving our high school dreams or our high school memories, because that would be really fucking boring.
Everyone would love that show.
They would love
that.
Wow. I remember, I do have one memory, one very distinct memory. We were at a football game and
here we go.
Bryan and I you were a Republican in high school, I believe.
Was I?
Yeah.
Okay.
You were. I think so, because you and I were both talking about politics on the sidelines of a high school football game, and we were talking fucking nonstop about politics. Right. And I don't know why that stuck in my head for whatever reason, but I just remember that, and I've remembered that for 20 plus years. And the interesting thing is you're still talking about fucking politics, and so am I. I am from a less authoritative figure. I am like I like to call myself a political idiot. Like, but it is.
But you're a successful idiot, and we're all very proud of you from Idaho. Well done, sir.
Well done.
So why are we talking about politics? Do you remember Mr. Trigstead?
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously for the many people, everyone who doesn't know
everybody
him,
that knows him.
So he was our history teacher, civics teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I will never forget, and I think actually is very appropriate for this conversation, is he reminded us of two things. What Benjamin Franklin said to the woman who approached him as they were figuring out what government we should have. And his answer to her when she said, well, what is it? He said, it's a republic if you can keep it. And Trigger was always harping on us to say that means you have an obligation to understand politics, to be involved in politics, local, state, whatever it is, be involved in your government because it's yours. And if you don't tend to your government, you'll lose it.
And those are profound things for a high school teacher to have actually.
He was a good man.
Yeah, he was a good man. Like there were a lot of really good teachers. The great thing is I didn't go to class much, so I didn't get an opportunity to interface with them.
Yeah. Well, and you've turned out to be a mess.
A complete mess.
Dear Lord.
I think your journey is pretty incredible because you left Lewiston, you joined the agency right after September 11th. What was the, do you remember at that point in time why you wanted to do it, or what was driving you to do that?
Yeah, I think probably similar to you in that, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, you loved your country. You understood that it had its challenges, its deficiencies, but fundamentally, you loved your country and you wanted to make sure it remained the greatest nation on the face of the earth and the most exceptional. And so I think that was a huge driver for me. I mean, it sounds cliche-ish and patriotic-y, but it's absolutely true. We were baptized in those fires in that time. The other piece is I think that the agency, much like the military community, it taps into that desire to just explore the world. Get on a ship, get on a plane, and go.
Right.
And I think that for me was really exciting because we're in northern Idaho, an incredible place. I love it. Love going back. I know you do too. But there's a big world. I want to go explore it. So I think those two things: love of country and just a curiosity for the world. Yeah.
Well, do you remember? Were you in college and did you start researching? Is that what you're doing? Were you did you see an ad somewhere? Like I've heard so many different stories on how they joined and why a person joined. And I'll get into one of my favorites here in a minute. But I want to hear, was there something that you saw or some image that kind of pulled the string on the sweater, so to speak?
I like to drive fast cars and sleep with lots of women. And that's like James Bond. Yeah. Is that not how it works?
I think so.
Oh, dear. No, that's not how it works. It's awful.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that in a minute. No, look, what was the question? I was focused on fast cars and women.
Was there one thing that you saw that kind of activated that imagination piece?
I think at the end of the day, as I started the application process, knowing that the agency had this mission to send people abroad to recruit spies and steal secrets. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right? The mission
Super
of itself is cool.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to do that, to earn money doing that job was like just an incredible opportunity for a small town, guy from, rural Idaho and the rest of my family's from Oregon, rural Oregon. What a great opportunity. So I threw my hat, in that ring, and for whatever crazy reason, they accepted me. Although, I don't think I've ever told you the story. So I get a call out of the blue one day, and they said, "Hey, Bryan, we know that we had interviewed you previously, and we really liked you, but we lost your file. Your application just slipped through the cracks. But we want to restart that process because we really liked you, and would you be interested?" Here's the kicker: they had never interviewed me. They confused me with someone else.
Sweet.
So I'm like, absolutely. I love talking to you guys too. That was, God, what a great interview. I was so disappointed that I fell short. But let's kick it up again. Let's do it. And I lied my way through that part, which means that I was a good case officer. I could lie well.
Yeah. So your journey actually started with a lie.
With a mistake.
Yeah, with a mistake. With a bureaucratic paperwork mistake, which is like every good government story starts with a good bureaucratic mistake.
That is correct. I'm a fraud. So, by the way, folks, you can cut that out and just replay that every time I post something or say something. Oh, look, he said he's a fraud.
It's a GIF. Yeah. We'll make a GIF out of it. It'll be good for Twitter. The guys on Twitter will love that.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so you apply, you get in. you start the work. Did your family have any idea? So what did you tell your family?
No. So I told them I worked for another 3-letter organization back in DC, and I kept it close hold because, as you know, when you start working at the agency, it's an incredibly competitive process to get in. And even though I fit my way the very first conversation, I obviously had to demonstrate that I was capable and did that. And then once you start, there's no guarantee you'll actually be certified. Right. Once you go through all the training, they put you through a series of tests at the very end, and then either you make it or you don't. And so until I made it through that process, I didn't want my family to know because I didn't want to come across as a failure, frankly.
Right.
So I wanted to prove to myself I could do it. And then once I got past that hurdle, then, I told a couple of folks in my family who promptly told everyone. So that's good.
Yeah. That is
now
good.
they look at they're proud, right? I'm sure with your family, same thing. Like, my boy went and did good things. So, that created some cover challenges.
Yeah, I had kind of the same thing. I didn't want to tell anybody because I was more concerned with, one, people not believing me because they truly just would be like, yeah, whatever, fucktard. They'd be like, sure you do, and then
but you look the part, come on.
Yeah, but then two, I was like, I know my dad. My dad talks to everybody. Like he'll stop at the convenience store and he's like, hey, Hal, my boy works for the CIA. What do you think about that? Don't tell anybody. Hey, and then it's like, well, who's that lady behind you? Well, that's the delivery person. Well, listen, delivery person, my son works for the CIA, so don't tell anybody. Yeah. That's the way my dad would actually work.
I found out years later that after I told my father, he told a very good friend of his who's Iranian.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's solid.
Fantastic, Dad. Great work.
Yeah. I kind of, after a few years, I was like, well, at the end of the day, there are a bunch of people out there telling their family members they work for the CIA and they don't.
True.
So then it actually does provide legitimate cover for action because especially if you're kind of an idiot growing up, people are like, yeah, okay, Ed, I know. Like, yeah, so your son, and they're like, he's probably hitchhiking across the United States. That's probably what he's doing.
He has an OnlyFans account.
Yeah,
that's what he does now.
Yeah, that's what he does.
He takes his clothes off.
We're proud of him.
Yeah.
And, but I purposely could not tell him because I knew this thing would just like catch fire. Yeah. So I just said that I was in the Army because I was in the Army. So I just kept on saying that I was in the Army for a long period of time. And then, eventually I was like, I don't even care, like whatever. And then half the people didn't believe me either way. So, I was talking to, a mutual friend of ours. I was talking to Brett Woodland and I was talking to him one day and he was like, so what do you do at the Army? And I was like, oh dude, I work for the CIA. I don't work for the Army. And he's like, okay, sure you do, buddy. Okay. That's super good.
Don't
and
you love to hear that? Like all your friends, like their expectation of you was pretty much failure.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Failure. Yeah. And you remember Nat, of course, I would imagine, right? So even Nat was like, okay, okay. So the good thing is that nobody actually felt that I was capable of doing that.
Gotcha.
So it really didn't matter one way or another.
Nice.
I think my dad was probably the only person that was like, I believe this. Yeah.
Nice.
Because he actually went to like the Special Forces Qualification Course graduation. Yeah. So he actually knew I was a Green Beret. Whereas everybody else was like, okay, buddy. Yeah. I thought they were much bigger. I always used to get that.
Yeah.
Like, aren't Green Berets much taller?
Yeah.
Aren't they like strong and
right?
And do they have like mustaches and big muscles and stuff? And I was like, yeah. I mean, a lot of them are way cooler looking than I am.
Big heart.
Yeah. I try. I'm like the little engine that could, It's like I'm like the national success story of just like blatant incompetence and a lack of physical stature.
But we're so proud of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
It's like it's like going to the special kid and being like, you know what, you are special. You are. And there's a place for everybody in this world.
There is.
And you're gonna end up scraping
run
gum
on a
off
coffee
the bottom
company.
Hey, that is true.
What happened?
What happened? I don't know. I do want to get into as we transition. So not fully transitioning, we're just partial transition.
Right.
Is
I'm cut everything off.
Yeah. So you spend some time there and you leave, we'll call it what, 2014? Is that right?
And at 15.
15?
Yeah.
And I think that's when was your first news experience and who was that with?
Yeah, so what a wild story. A friend of mine, he was actually in the Pentagon, 9/11 attacks, survived it, started doing TV to share his story. And he transitioned out of the Army and became a producer for the legendary Larry King.
Right.
And so when I finished up that fall of 2015, knew I was transitioning out, we were chatting. And he said, man, I don't know if you'd be interested, but we would love to have you sit down with Larry King and talk about national security issues, particularly North Korea and I think China and a few others. And of course, I'm like, no, I'm pretty busy. Larry King's kind of small fries.
Small fry.
Of course, I'm going to say yes. Larry King's this legend. He actually, when I sat down and chatted with him, he interviewed the OSS director, Wild Bill Donovan. So for folks who are listening, yeah, the founder of the CIA, but actually the founder of OSS. Yeah, this guy is amazing. So I learned all these incredible stories sitting down with Larry King, and I think it was some famous celebrity's child came in as we were having supper after he and I did this interview. And what an amazing man, and what a loss is he just passed ever so recently. Yeah. But at any rate, so that was the first interview. Sat down with him. He's busting my chops about North Korea invading the United States. We're having a great time. What a wonderful memory. So that kicked things off. And some other producers at CNN and Fox News both saw that interview and they're like, hey, that guy is decent in front of the camera. Not really smart, but we can throw some, makeup on him and give him the words to say. Yeah. He can do it. So I started writing then for Fox News and San Francisco Chronicle and the LA Times, and just started basically sharing my heart about different issues. So at that time, what do we do in terms of engaging our friends around the world on sort of radical Islam, and how do we both embrace the fact that most Muslim people are incredibly peaceful and wonderful people with this small subset of folks who are clearly out to kill us and upend modernity and all the rest of it. So we're writing about that, North Korea, some of the stuff that that they were doing around their ballistic missile program, their fissile nuclear program. How do we get a handle of that? Because they're shipping that stuff abroad to places like Iran, to Syria. So these things that I knew about, that I'm very passionate about, I started writing. And then 2015 turned into 16, and we had an election. You may remember it.
I remember something about that.
Vaguely, Hillary Clinton. She's a former first lady. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I follow
I've
these
heard
things.
of her. Yeah,
not smart. So I'll recap.
Yeah.
So Hillary Clinton, Trump, it was a big deal. So I started writing more about politics, and I think that's where my background wasn't really helpful from a CIA perspective, but I was passionate about the country and the mission, which everybody listening to this program, no doubt, is as well, and trying to take that lens of country first and how is that being manifested in our political system or not? And so I started writing a lot about that, and I came at it from being a Democrat and for many, many, many years. And growing up in the Pacific Northwest in the 80s and the 90s, Democrats were very, very different. It was a relatively moderate to conservative part of the country where Democrats were moderate conservative, represent a lot of rural districts, a lot of conservative rural districts. Tom Foley, Speaker of the House, you may recall, he was from the Eastern District of Washington State, Spokane, Walla Walla. So we grew up in a very different time with a different political party that was the Democratic Party. And so my family was largely all Democrats as well. So I started writing kind of from that background and coming out of that time. In Idaho, Cecil Andrus was governor, Democrat. So at any rate.
It has a long heritage of Democrats that have actually done some pretty incredible things. Frank Church is probably one of the most well-known. He was a senator.
That's right.
Yeah, he was a senator from Idaho. And, obviously the Frank Church hearings had a profound impact on the country. He was in the spotlight for a number of years. It completely changed the way that I think the CIA is run today, actually.
Amen.
But I completely agree. It's interesting. My grandfather was a Democrat. And he was a logger. He was a Democrat. My dad was a Republican. I remember those guys going at it tooth and nail. Yeah. But there's no way my grandfather would be considered a Democrat today. There's no way.
Right.
Like if he was still alive, he'd be like, can't identify with that party. Right.
Well, and that's why I left. And I think that so many people in my family have either become independent or Republicans because the Democratic Party values the people that are running the joint are either virulently anti-American. They've embraced ideologies like Marxism, which have destroyed every country that's ever tried it, led to tens of millions of deaths. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That is very clear with the Ilhan Omars and the AOCs and all the rest of them. They have basically pole position within the Democratic Party. And you don't have any blue dog Democrats, those more conservative Democrats anymore. Even there are a few of them left that they don't even speak up against this more radical wing of the party, which tells you all you need to know about the modern left.
Well, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that they're embracing Marxism? Do you think it's purely based on power or perceived power? Where do you see the DNC being able to embrace that and take it in the future? Because I just don't see it as far as like being a long and beneficial history as far as like tying your horse to Marxism. I just don't think it's good.
So, I mean, amen. I mean, history shows that with painful clarity in terms of the disastrous nature of unfettered socialism, Marxism, Stalin's version of that. So, communism. It's not sustainable. Anybody who reads just a modicum of history knows that leftist ideology is profoundly destructive in no different ways than Nazism was. Of course, it's not sustainable for any country to adopt that ideology. Why the Democratic Party is doing it, I wrestled with that for many years. But I thought that it could be basically removed from the party, this crazy ideology, if we just looked at what the socialists were doing. And that is basically using the Democratic Party as a parasitic host to move the party and the zeitgeist of the party and the nation to more big government solutions for everything. In fact, the government would run everything.
Right.
But I think if we could just acknowledge that that's what their socialists are doing, they're overtaking the party, and then we're going to turn the party and indeed the country into a socialist nation. Of course, if we acknowledge that that's happening, party elders will say that's crazy. The governors, particularly let's say the more conservative Democratic governors, will say, forget it, that's not happening. But that response, which we should have seen, didn't happen. So why? I'll tell you, I don't know what the answer to that question is. I think that a lot of people, and I think I probably put myself in this bucket, say that there's always been a current within the Democratic Party that's always been radical left. It's always been Marxist. But it has been kept at bay by the fact that most Democrats don't believe that stuff. They might share some embrace of government solutions, government social safety nets, right? The FDR, great, the New Deal and all those kinds of things. There's crossover historically between the radical left and the more leftist elements of the Democratic Party. And if you listen to Pelosi and Schumer, what they will say privately, based on some conversations I've had with friends who work on the Hill, is they believe that they can control Ilhan Omar's and the Rashid Tlaib's and the Ocasio-Cortez. They think they can control that socialist wing, keep that energy in the party, fire up the base, and get them to the polls to electoral victory. So they're thinking short term. They're not thinking, well, what happens if you invite a horrifically dangerous ideology and its adherents into your big tent? Right. What the hell happens medium to long term? Can you really control that beast? No, you can't.
You can't.
So that's why, I left. And I think most sensible people who are Democrats historically, or their families were like mine, or perhaps like yours, have left as well. It's just, it's no longer recognizable or a party or one that you can support. It just doesn't represent our interests.
And it's interesting to me because I'm looking at it from the perspective of obviously it's about votes and obviously it's about power or control. We can oversimplify it and distill it down to a combination of factors. But I see their ability to essentially deal with the devil to a certain degree in this. I don't think they're addressing it as, well, Bernie's a great example, right? So, I mean, obviously with the popularity of Bernie Sanders, with, his overt positions. So even as he defines himself, does he just define himself as a democratic socialist? Is that what he defines himself as?
It's a silly name game. He's a socialist, yeah.
Right. He's a socialist.
North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Correct.
So let's just drop that pretense.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing that I've seen, at least from a very outsider's perspective, is that socialism is still socialism. And the way that you described it, which is this is a parasitic host. So you're using the DNC in order to legitimize essentially a failed ideology in order to implement it long term.
Right.
Is that part of the handbook, do you think?
Of the Socialist Handbook?
Yeah.
I know the answer to that question because the Democratic Socialists of America have that on their website. I'm not even kidding you.
I know.
If you go to their website, it
Yeah.
is there. It is their treatise where back in 2014, the political leadership on their political committee, they put out basically their white paper on what ails the socialist movement and how to get power in this country.
Mm-hmm.
They laid out the fact that socialism is a disaster and has been disastrous everywhere it's been tried. In this country, the only way that you are successful is becoming one of the two political parties. There is no space for a third political party to actually make a change or become the dominant position, the political position. So you have to take over either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And very clearly, the one that makes the most sense, and they say this, is the Democratic Party. So we, the socialists, are going to take over as many Democratic positions, senators, governorships, et cetera, until such time as that we change the zeitgeist, the culture, the values of the Democratic Party, the people, the adherents, the voters, and then we'll break away. And then we'll leave behind the Democratic Party like it's the Libertarian Party or some third party that actually has no relevancy on a national level.
Right.
So that's their plan. They've been very clear about it. And if you understand that is true, and they're very open with that, so why aren't the Democratic leaders stepping up and saying, no, you're not going to use this as a parasitic host, right? Or the Jack Kennedys that used to stand up to this kind of stuff. They're gone. Right? Madness.
No, and that's my question, which is why? Why are they not standing up to it?
Well, I think they think they can control it. Right. So again,
they think they can control it. Do you think that's a sole reason?
I think that is Pelosi, Schumer, et cetera. I think that their belief is that if the more people than they can get to the polls to punch that ballot for the Democratic candidate, then you can then deal with the backroom problems with AOC and Tlaib and the rest of them. You can deal with that in DC, for instance. You can control it. And that is, based on all the conversations I've had with friends who work on Capitol Hill, that is the calculus, that this can be controlled.
Do you think that there's a future for socialism in America? I'm only saying that. Do you think that they're going to gain inertia? Do you think their numbers will grow?
Well, so
it's a fear.
We have some good data on what is happening in the left in this country. And what we see very clearly is that socialism is increasingly accepted as a viable alternative to capitalism. That is especially true within the Democratic Party. Democrats increasingly view socialism as a good thing. And part of that is because socialists have lied about what socialism is.
Right.
If you ask most Democrats, or frankly anybody in this country, in fact, if I ask folks listening, what is socialism? Most people will say, well, it's a little extra money in your Social Security check, or it's it's more of a social safety net, which is not true. That is not socialism. Right? Or they'll say, well, it's like Denmark or Sweden. They're socialist countries that provide a lot of good things for their people. Not socialist countries. Those are both capitalist countries that have a profound social safety net paid for by big taxes. Right. That is not socialism. What socialism is the government owns the economy. The government creates an economy's means of production. They decide what gets built and how much of it gets built, and then they decide who takes whatever particular job to make all that happen. There are boards that sit down and say, Evan, you're going to be X job because we need to make these widgets over here. And we're going to set the price, right? There's no market mechanism that says, hey, this is how much we should make at this price. We're just going to decide as a government. That is socialism. That is a disaster. And should that happen in this country? I mean, if we want the nation to end, sure. Anybody who watches other countries who've adopted this, most recently places like Venezuela, like Cuba, they're countries that exist on paper, but they have virtually collapsed. So would it happen here? Could it happen here? The numbers are growing, and the socialists know that.
So how do you, what are the conversations that Americans need to be having now? Because I see it as very similar to you, which is I see there's an increased acceptance to a wide variety of socialist, we'll call it socialist agendas, where people are saying, yeah, I think that's acceptable. I think that it's okay. So where do you draw the line? And I'm only asking this from the context of as the GOP, as you start to look at the GOP and maybe the future of politics and even a third party, how do you start to clearly differentiate and then co-opt other Democrats into the bigger, I would say, there's a less willingness to accept that ideology in the GOP. Like there's almost, I would say, fractions of a percent that would say that they're open to socialism.
Republicans are open to socialism, yeah. A much smaller fraction of Democrats, yeah.
Because what do you think the percentage is on the Democrat side? I mean, just from rough numbers, what do you think? Because you're listening to the numbers and you're saying, okay, people are out there and they're talking about this and it's growing in acceptance.
So if I'm not mistaken, some of the latest numbers showing Democrats saying that socialism is actually a good thing, you're looking around the 60%. I mean, it is a majority of Democrats who think that. So you're raising your eyebrows for a good reason, because you would hope that number would be much, much less. That's not true. Because socialism, per this document that I talked about, that's on DSA's website, they talk about that they have to norm their broken ideology.
Right.
And so they have to sell it with people like AOC, who are just cool, fun bartenders.
Cool, fun.
Yeah.
Cool, fun.
And they talk about how we just need more equality and more post offices and more national parks, and you should not have to work if you don't want to. Like, all that sounds really cool.
Right.
I guess.
Super cool.
Yeah. But unfortunately, none of it works long term, certainly medium term, because as the expression said before, eventually you run out of millionaires to kill or tax in order to pay for the system.
Yeah. So the arguments that I've heard, which is interesting, because I've tried to have a series of conversations around people that think that these are either they're subject matter experts on how socialism is increasing in America, or they have maybe some socialist views. So I'm trying to have these conversations where we can identify this as an ongoing conversation in the United States, but how do you justify, or how do they justify the failures of these nation states with this system? How are they justifying this, and what's the argument that you've heard?
So they will say, while it is true that North Korea's tried socialism, Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, et cetera, they've all tried it, but they just didn't do it right. And so if here in the United States we do it right, we will show that actually it's much, much better than capitalism, and people will be far better off than they were under capitalism, which is, of course, absurd. It's a silly argument, because if you've tried it 10, 15, 20 times and it's failed every time, maybe it's actually a problem with whatever you're trying to do. It's possible that you might be able to pull up, but it's really suggestive that there's something fundamentally wrong with what you're trying to create. And that's true here. That's true with socialism. It just doesn't work because fundamentally it introduces market inefficiencies, that you're producing stuff with people who don't want to produce it, and then you're producing it for people who don't want to buy it. You can't sustain an economy that way. So, but how do you convince people that that's true and that's crazy? Most of us are busy raising kids, and we have jobs, and we're doing 1,000 things. Do we really have time for this self-actualized, top of Maslow's hierarchy of need thing about socialism? No, most people are like, I'm trying to pay my bills. Like, I got a crazy spouse. I got my kids. Like, I got things to do. So it means that a small, small number of people in this country are actually going to determine the fate of the nation, because they are plugged in. They see what's happening. They see what's coming. And now they're going to try to rally other people to their cause who are busy doing other things.
Right.
And this gets back to what our good teacher, Mr. Trigstead, said, right? You have a republic if you can keep it.
Right.
So at what point do we, as a country, we're busy doing 1,000 other things? And I get it. I'm busy too. But when do you stop and say, okay, this is too much. This is too far. I disagree. It's wrong. I'm running for city council, or I'm supporting somebody on the PTA who's going to change my schools back to sensible lessons for the kids, not some of this 1619 Project New York Times or gobbledygook, right? Right. Or run for state legislature, whatever it is, get back involved in your government. That's the challenge. Is, do you start doing that across the board too late?
Right.
When the socialists, who are already very well organized, so
right.
The social justice Democrats are the organization that AOC is a part of, the Justice Democrats, very well organized. The mayor of Buffalo is a socialist, just elected a socialist there. That happened because AOC socialist, Democratic Socialist, organized this person and got a bunch of folks who were gullible to vote for it. And now Buffalo has a socialist mayor.
Do you think that the woke movement is part of the socialist movement? Do you think they're tied together?
Well, I think that there are sort of those concentric circles that overlap, right? So I think that there are some shared goals, right? So I think that the woke movement fundamentally is about stripping one's individuality.
Psst. Caleb, did you know with Black Rifle Coffee's Coffee Club subscription, you can get fresh coffee shipped to you every month? What? You don't even have to go to the store. Whoa. You don't even have to leave your bed. What? Wow. How did you get in here?
You might want to go ahead and join the Black Rifle Coffee Club subscription before one of these guys shows up at your place.
And making them part of a collective identity. So if I'm not just Bryan anymore and you're not Evan anymore, but we're straight or we're gay or we're black, we're white, or whatever that new identity, we're not an individual. We don't think for ourselves. We don't think critically. What happens is then if we are now part of a new community where our identity is that we are trans, we can't have an individual thought.
Right.
We can't speak it loudly. Why? Because the other people will shame us, particularly those in power, positions of authority, will tell us to shut up because that's not what we believe. Well, that's what I believe. Well, shut up. It's not what we believe. So suddenly you don't have that individual expression, that thought, critical thinking, reason, all of those things. So I think that that's the danger. You create that kind of a populace. So that when you have that, and then you introduce socialism, basically, hey, we all think socialism's great. Well, I'm not sure, says Evan and Bryan. Shut up.
Right.
Yes, you do. It's what we're going to do. That's the danger of where wokeism leads.
I read this is an incredible statistic probably a couple months ago, and they were talking about how the difference between what's accepted in academia as far as a legitimate ideology. Right? And socialism was accepted by 80% of the professors, which blew my fucking mind. And I think because I'm looking at kind of the shaping and the development years of people between the ages of 18 and 24, and if they're being co-opted by academia and they're legitimizing this ideology, do you think this is part of the problem?
So we have to go back a little bit in history, back into the 1960s in particular, right?
Right.
So when the socialist movement knew that they were not going to have pole position in the Democratic Party on the left, they were getting beat up, so they had to go somewhere. And so most of them retreated into academia in the 1960s and 70s. Those in particular who didn't take the more radical routes of like the ethno-Marxism of,
right.
I was going to say Black Lives Matter, which is connected, but Black Panther movements and the September 16th movement, which bombed the U.S. Capitol building in 1983.
Right.
So that movement, which was much more violent, of course, and Stalinist in that sense, the rest of them retreated into academia and became basically, how do we reorganize ourselves and create a new national movement? And that's where they made their beachhead. They hung out for a while, much like Al-Qaeda would in the caves of Afghanistan. Let's regroup and figure out how we strike back and when we have a stronger movement. And that's precisely what they've done.
The thing I was thinking about was how the Soviets and the KGB, if we go back even post the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 1900s, and we look at when we look at socialism and the rise of socialism within the United States, we can actually go back, I think, all the way into the 30s before World War II, and we can really talk about the ideology then. And I also want to talk about the KGB. If you've done some research specifically related to how the KGB used to try to target academics, one of the conversations I've been having with people is how the KGB would go and target the pillars of Western academia. They would go to Cambridge and Oxford, and they would co-opt, and then they would essentially deploy from there because they knew if they could get the Western pillars of philosophical or political ideology thought. They could, if they got this accepted in Cambridge and Oxford, it would be accepted in Harvard and Stanford and Princeton and Yale. Do you believe that, or is that just a partial conspiracy?
No, that's history. I mean, someone who can pick up a history book will see very clearly and very quickly that that's precisely what the Soviet Union did. And there's some great Russian or Soviet spies in the UK and elsewhere in academia recruiting them. So it's not a conspiracy. It's a well-known historical fact. So they believed that they could create intellectual warriors, right? And begin the process of moving from that beachhead in these academic organizations, universities and such, and teach kids this to believe it in the same way. And I think that you're seeing that metastasize now. So it's not a conspiracy. It's established history.
The thing that it continues to amaze me is that when we look at the Soviet intelligence apparatus and we look at how it's shifted, but we look at who's actually in charge of the Soviet Union at this point, which is obviously Putin. I mean, he's one of the most powerful people in the world. Do you think that there's been a continuation of the ideology or implementation of the ideology by the KGB, then the FSB, then whatever the fuck they are now?
SBR,
do you think that they're continuing to shape political ideology for the means of destruction, or do you think that they actually believe that they can benefit from socialism internationally?
I don't think what drives most of Russian intelligence or Vladimir Putin is an ideological conviction that socialism is where it's at.
Okay.
I think what drives a lot of that, they may utilize that as a tool,
right? But
I don't think that economic system is one that they are committed to, much in the same way that communist China is less committed to, a strict Marxist society. I think what drives Putin and the SVR, the intelligence writ large in Russia, is one, many things, but one, they are still very, very angry that they collapsed as a country and a world power. So they want to bring down the country, the United States, that brought them down.
Right.
So whatever they can do to do that, they don't care. It's about revenge, right? It's very powerful emotion. I think any of us would understand that we were brought low, our families were destroyed, et cetera. We'd want revenge too. So that's driving a lot of this. So they're going to take advantage of whatever fissures might currently exist and expand them. And create new ones if they can. But the bottom line is that they want to make us hurt.
So it's not ideologically driven. It's more about evening the score and then causing as much chaos in order to capitalize on that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a big piece. But I think that there are other grievances that if you talk to someone like a Putin or a Russian thought leader, is that they look at America's foreign policy in places like Libya or places like Iraq, and they're like, you guys go in and you're great with your bombs and your plans, but then you walk away and the place is, ends up being a shithole. So you have no medium to long-term strategy or commitment to the people of those countries, and you're making the world less safe, and it's a hot mess. So there's that piece. They also talk about, what's happening in Eastern Europe that's their backyard. In other words, it's their Cuba, and we are in their backyard, expanding NATO, trying to push Ukraine further into the NATO, stronghold. And why that is so egregious to them is, imagine if Cuba, had lots of Chinese military bases in addition to Russian military bases, or they had lots of them on the border with ourselves in Mexico. Maybe that would solve the immigration problem. But it would cause us a degree of consternation, would it not?
Yeah, it would.
So, look, I think at the end of the day, Putin is doing what he should do as a president, which is he acts in his own best interest. I think he's a son of a bitch. I think he does terrible things to his political opponents. I don't think that its form of government is a good one. I mean, what do we want Russian governments to be throughout the world, include our own?
Right.
Of course not. I mean, there is no freedom, intellectual or otherwise, in Russia. There might be a veneer of it, but it's at the whim of Putin or the intel services or the police services. So we clearly don't want Russia, as it currently is, to win this global race for humanity. But we also have made the Russian threat far graver than I think it actually is. I mean, keep in mind, Russia has the economy of Italy.
Right.
So they have some leverage in terms of natural gas, more of the Europeans than us. and then some influence on the oil markets. So they do have some additional power, points that maybe Italy doesn't have. But I just, it's unfortunate the way that we've handled our relationship with Russia. I think we should have handled it much, much differently.
In what way?
They will almost certainly always be an adversary. But I think that we have created a giant of a threat where it's what they can actually do is not commiserate. They punch up. Russia does a brilliant job of punching us in the nose as the weak guy. Right? I mean, they have a fantastic cyber capability. So that cannot be discounted. They play a very agitating role in places like Afghanistan or in Libya. So they create some degree of instability that keeps us mired.
Right.
I mean, those places, look, we did this, we go to Vietnam, they did it to us there. And after we did it to them in Afghanistan in the 80s. So it's that they have the Russian mindset will always be different. Their interests will always be different. But that doesn't mean that you have to create this hysteria, which we've had for the past 4 or 5 years, that they are sort of this great monster that is on the verge of taking over this country. That's absurd.
Who's their greatest ally, specifically related to intelligence?
Well, the Russians will use anybody for as long as they can for their benefit. And that's true of any country. They're very, very good at that. So I would say that some of their biggest allies, or the most important one, is China. And that's only because China hates us and Russia hates us. So, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as the expression goes. So they definitely leverage that relationship.
So when we look at China specifically, because, I have my personal feelings. People have listened to the show. They understand my personal feelings. But when I look at kind of the list of international threats or strategic threats to the United States, I would say that China is so much more significant than Russia. But you wouldn't realize it from mainstream media. At least
who owns
maybe
mainstream media? In fact?
But maybe I'm incorrect. I mean, you're a former intel guy, so you tell me, who do you deem the greater threat, Russia or China?
Oh, there is absolutely no question it's China. I mean, if anybody tells you otherwise, they are bonkers. They don't understand Russia and what Russia can do. Clearly, the Russians have nukes. They have the cyber capability. All that is true. And they have an economy the size of Italy. They punch up. But China's different. They are a different adversary. If you look at, for instance, global trade from 2000 to now, the numbers of countries that send most of their goods either to China or they buy most of their goods from China has gone from a pretty good mix between the United States and China. In other words, there's a good mix of who are our economic trade partners, the majority of their trade and ours. It's switched. Once we allowed China to go into WTO in the late 1990s, China became the world's manufacturer. And with that comes a lot of leverage and a lot of power. So they've used it very, very wisely to control the world's economies. Because our elites, our business owners in particular, they know that they can ship their stuff to China, pay pennies on the dollar in terms of expenses, what they otherwise would have here. So they make a lot more money. And along with it, they don't want to now upset that balance. They want to hold China's feet to the fire. They don't care that 1 million plus Uyghurs are dead in China. And of course, there's a group of mostly Muslim people that China has slaughtered because they are problematic people to the regime. Right? Our elites don't care that our local economies or manufacturing economies are decimated. People are in more rural communities, for instance, or manufacturing communities are gone. They don't care about that. They care about making money. So this appropriate kind of reset of the relationship between ourselves and China, that is one of the greatest ones that has to happen. But it's the one that I don't know, frankly, will, because our elites are too deeply in bed with and in making money, too much money from the Chinese market.
One thing that I thought was interesting over the last 4 years is you had, obviously, or previous 4 years, the Trump administration, is that you had a open and willingness to talk about the what was it? How did they refer to him? The Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, right? You had this willingness of the administration to directly hold China accountable, at least in the public forum. But do you think the China-America relations, do you think that they improved, or do you think they were strained? Do you think that the previous administration did a good job at holding them to task? Do you think they were incompetent at it? Like, what's your assessment of it?
So let's step back. And I know we've had this conversation, and I'm sure folks who are listening, if you're plugged in at all, know this, what I'm about to say is true. This country is at war with China. And we may not acknowledge that publicly, but we're in a covert war with China. And because that's true, we've got a lot of these quiet things that are happening behind the scenes that are building. And they're getting worse and not better. So I think that there is some recognition in Washington that China is bad, that we need to do something about it, that we will not just lose our superpower status, but that if China actually wins this thing, in other words, if we become a minority power, in the country, in the world rather, and China is preeminent, is humanity going to be led by a bunch of communists who run over their people with tanks and throw them like the Uyghurs in concentration camps? That's how they deal with dissent? So there is this recognition that China's bad. It's writ large. I should say the government is bad.
Right.
The communist government is bad. The Chinese people are actually quite lovely, as most people are in the world, in fact. But we are so deeply embedded, our economy is so deeply embedded with the Chinese that it's really tough to yank that tether away. So I think what you saw in the Trump administration was a much more verbal, a willingness to bash in the Trumpian ways that the president could and did, that China's bad. And they are the source of a lot of the world's ills. That's true. Whereas you saw under President Biden now, and of course, President Obama a number of years before, basically slapping the hand of China when they would get caught. Say the Chinese were hacking into the OPM, the biggest hack in the country's history. Or, most recently, when Biden, there was another hack, and Biden was basically like, don't you do this again. And a reporter asked him, are you going to hold him to account in terms of sanctions or something? No, we're not going to do that. So you have a lot of continued great talk and some covert activity regarding the Chinese, but there is no real effort by this country now, particularly under this administration, where you have the son of the president who's collecting millions of dollars from the regime. And if you believe the gentleman named Tony Bobulinski and the laptop that's been found in Mr. Hunter Biden, that his father, Joe Biden, was actually taking a cut of these business deals. If that is indeed true, and I hope the FBI continues to look into that and prove that to be true ultimately, then you have someone in the White House who is interested in America's preeminence or in America's values. He's willing to sell it. His son certainly was willing to sell out. Does apple fall far from the tree on that one? I doubt it.
Well, when we look at China and their interference specifically in the United States, and we look at both Russia and China, do you think they're working in concert with one another in order to cause a fractionalization using media and social media in the United States? Do you think it's an open secret that they're cooperating, or do you think it's a non-cooperative, but basically they're working towards the same agenda? So you have two disruptive actors that are essentially working in very separate ways. Do you think they're ever running in concert, like together with specific operations?
Yeah. Back in the old days, they're engaged in liaison operations.
Right.
The two of them sitting down, talking about what they can do together. So, to be a little bit careful here, I'll just say that it would be crazy to think that the two weren't collaborating on how to best break the back of the United States of America. Of course, they're talking to each other about that. And they are, to the degree to which they can trust each other on these collaborative operations, they'll do it. And then they're, of course, going to do their own thing, unilateral operations. So that's not a conspiracy. That is certainly known. So leaving that there, the question is, if that's true, can we bust apart that relationship? How can we respond? But look, I think part of the first step is just our own elites and our own people leading this country saying, communist China is bad. We need to untether ourselves economically. We need to shift the world's factory that we participate in away from China to our friends in places like Central and South America, for instance, would make most sense logistically, right?
Right.
And maybe some throughout Southeast Asia, although that comes with some problems, places like Thailand or Vietnam and Cambodia. But let's shift it to North America to the extent we can, maybe South America, Central America in particular. Let's do that because that's much closer to home. Logistically, we can control it better. And that might even have some great secondary effects, like reducing the amount of illegal immigration, because people are fleeing places like Guatemala and El Salvador, not just because of corruption, because there are no economic opportunities there.
Mm-hmm. No, I've seen the same thing. I've traveled in Central and South America, obviously for coffee, and I think one of the things that I continue to talk about is our trade relationships in Central and South America are really important. And one of the things that I specifically can talk to with Black Rifle is we buy millions of pounds of coffee from Central and South America, and I typically pay a higher price than the majority of the coffee companies out there because I want a higher quality product. Yep. Higher quality product means there's sustainable agriculture. It means that they're paying a livable wage. It means that they're building schools and having running water and a wide variety of other things that are really important to the local economy.
What I hear you saying is you're willing to sacrifice profit.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of... I think you got a combination of really complex problems, but one of the biggest problems is that I see it shifting in corporate America at this point, but I think in the 80s and 90s, you'll have a board of directors in a corporation, and ultimately they're answering to the shareholders, and it's all about profit, right? So how can we drive growth and profit? So pennies actually matter, because if your agenda is only profit, then you're only beholden to the profit.
Yep.
You're not actually being held responsible for, we'll call it ethics in business, right? So I think it's directly contradictory to some of the things that I believe, which is I think there needs to be less federal intervention most of the time, especially an individual liberty, not necessarily on a lot of things that directly impact, we'll call it environment, safety issues specifically. But one of the things that I would love to see, and I don't know if you've had these conversations with people, is we'll call it a general incentive for corporations to do more business, either within the United States or within, we'll call it friendly countries. Do you see that there's a participation between the intelligence community and we'll call it the business community in that way, which is when we're looking at policy, politics, international foes? Do you think that there's a cooperation between those things, or do you think it's fairly siloed?
Yeah, I think there's just a profound separation. You mentioned, Frank Church back in the 70s and then all the way to today. There's been a huge reluctance by the intelligence community to embed itself within the commercial world. And that's another topic that we can have in a secure setting with people who are clear to know. But the point is that there is a general silo between those worlds. And so the way that you change the behavior of the economic actors in this country is not by introducing, the Department of Justice in terms of the FBI or the CIA. You have to make, from a policy perspective, a compelling economic case.
Correct.
That Evan will make just as much or close to as much money by working with folks who share our values, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not running a charity.
Right.
You are running a company. You have fantastic employees who are doing great things, and you got to keep the lights on, produce a great product. You got to market. You got a lot of expenses, and you have to make money. So let's make sure, from a policy perspective, from a leadership perspective, I put in the regulatory environment from a federal level to make sure that Evan can be successful. And I step out as much as I need to, but I make sure that I clear the playing field as much as I can from a policy perspective, tax policy, et cetera, that you can be successful and you can go to Central and South America and do your work, which for a policymaker also benefits me, because as you're doing that, the hope is that you are also, and as a leader, I'm going to encourage you to engage in good business ethics and the rest of it. You are going to create more stability by your business operations in those places. That's the goal. It's an imperfect goal. And we've seen it where that actually hasn't been true. But that also means that we have an obligation to keep trying.
And the last 7 years in business, here specifically, JT and I were having this conversation on the way in today. We were talking about how we can't get some items even manufactured in the United States anymore. So a good example is double wall stainless steel. So these things right over here. There is not a double wall vacuum sealed stainless steel manufacturer in the United States. There's not one. So you can't buy a product like this in the United States. You can only go to China. So I think from the consumer's perspective, they're also very contradictory because the consumer wants something inexpensive and they want it high quality.
Yeah.
If you were to make this, Yeti double wall stainless steel thermos in the United States, this thing would probably cost you $150 at the door easily. So there's not even the manufacturing capability in the United States to get some of these items at this point. So even if there was an economic incentive, it'd still take us a substantial amount of time in order to build the infrastructure so we could build the items here, which I think is truly, it's kind of an exercise in futility at times when you're trying to talk to people specifically about this, which is made in America does mean something to a lot of people. Like I love to only hire and bring in manufacturing that's specifically here in the United States or in our hemisphere. Like I like that, at least from South America perspective. The unfortunate reality is that we've outsourced our manufacturing to your point. And so some of these things are not manufactured in the United States and there's not an economic incentive to bring them back.
Right.
The other piece is I think that there's not only an economic benefit to this, which is logistics. It plays less of a toll, specifically on the environment because we're not moving things in, big ships that are moving across the ocean. We're not flying things in, right? You're trucking them across the United States. I think there's an economic incentive that has to be, I think, pushed from the leadership or our political leadership. The two, and this is, I think there's a national security perspective. And that's why I think they have to work together, which we've seen in the last 18 months, which is now if we outsource our manufacturing and there's a pandemic, we find ourselves in a situation where we can't make anything here.
Right.
Now, supply and demand comes into play. And now you have inflation because now you have a bunch of people that are off work and now you don't have manufacturing. You don't even have the ability to put people back to work. And outside countries have more influence on your manufacturing capability. So my point in this is not to just go on some kind of weird diatribe. It's
I'm tracking.
How do you see the ability for, I think, our national security interests and then our economic interests in order to work together? Is this a State Department function?
The bigger picture is you were laying out both the national security argument and the economic argument to do the right thing.
Right.
To reinstitute American manufacturing and or have some degree of our manufacturing ability in Central and South America, our allies. It's not that we can't do it. Very, very smart people, smarter than us, which I know might be impossible to think they exist. But maybe.
Might be impossible.
A couple Idaho boys here figuring it all out. Now, the point is all the solutions exist. That's not the issue. It's political will.
Right.
So when you have, as we do in this country, multiple administrations who have people that have businesses in China or equity stakes in Chinese conglomerates of different kinds, or their families do, that's where we fall short. Because we know the solutions, and we have the politicians who say the right thing. But the follow through by members of Congress, some of whom, by the way, spoiler alert, are actually recruited by the Chinese. But that's a different conversation.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, isn't that something? Or they can be influenced in some way. Look, and our media, et cetera. The point is, you have to have political will for people who don't just have the policy solutions and don't just say what we ought to do, but then move that legislation forward, sign it, and implement it, execute it, fund it. We know how to fix this. And that's actually one of the problems I think that I see repeatedly in this country on lots of different issues. We are still an exceptional nation. We're going through a really crappy time right now, across the board, lots of different issues. There is nothing, not one single problem in this country that can't be solved today. It's the question of political will.
Right.
People willing to stand up and get it done because we have the solutions. That's actually a pretty awesome position to be in. We're not like, Zimbabwe that's otherwise collapsed and we don't have the resources or the ability to put the policy solutions together. No, they're in a much worse shape because they can't really fix a lot of their problems. Certainly not anytime soon. We can. And we choose not to. And by we, it's the folks in Washington, D.C., in Congress, Senate, and the House, and the White House. And that's been true multiple generations of politicians going back for 20, 30 years, certainly from the Clinton era when he pushed through China in the WTO. And it didn't change under Bush or under Obama. And I think Trump used a lot of the good rhetoric, and I think he was pushing hard. But there were people in his administration that were in the back pocket of the Chinese too. Let's be honest about that. And Joe Biden, dear God, so many of his folks are in the back pocket, to include his son and maybe even himself. So you have to have good political leadership who's willing to step up and do the right damn thing. And that's the problem in this country. We don't. And that's why I'm supporting you, Evan Hafer, for president. Is that where this is going?
Yeah,
it's a setup.
No. It's definitely not. Definitely not. I don't even have a Twitter. I don't even have a Twitter account. I can't. I don't know if I can survive that. I think that.
Just make sure you launch your campaign on the New York Times.
Yeah. I'll do the story in the New York Times. That's how I'm going to launch it because.
Too soon?
Evidently,
is that too soon?
No, I mean, I enjoy being called a woke cuck 1,000 times a day across Twitter because of that story. I think, one of the things I was thinking about during the Trump administration was the rhetoric that was used against the Chinese, and there's a complex debate as far as like the trade agreements and holding accountability and the villainization of the agenda called America First, right? Because I've heard it from versions of the left, which is, this is xenophobic, it's racist. Right. Like, okay, yeah, you guys, you're right. Okay. Do you think that that's directly coming from the Chinese as far as the information operation, or do you think that that's something that they've co-opted a series of people to kind of be lockstep within an ideology and that automatically happens? Okay,
so a couple of things. Let's first start with this horseshit talking point from the left that either the America First or the Trump administration, the Republican Party today, is somehow xenophobic systemically, and it's just full of a bunch of racists, etc. That's horseshit, and we know that's horseshit. The data tells us it's horseshit. In 2020, during that election, under Trump's campaign, the GOP put together on the federal level a more diverse coalition of voters than any GOP nominee since 1960. More Black people, more Hispanic people, more Asian people, more gay folks, LGBTQ, etc., plus sign, pi, whatever. More of those folks voted for the Republican Party in 2020 than 1960. So something is going on in this country, and it's a good thing. They are saying enough of the shit that we have seen for 20 or 30 years. We're willing to vote for a guy, Donald Trump, who is unpredictable, says crazy things in tweets, but he represents what we need, which is a human firecracker that explodes in Washington, D.C., and everybody doesn't know how to handle it. Because we are getting to a point of desperation where we don't know what else to do other than to elect a reality TV star who's going to blow up everything.
Right.
So Trump, to me, was and look, you can debate, whether you like him or dislike him, but the point is he has served as this forcing function for this country to wake the fuck up. That we have a broken Washington, D.C., a broken elite that is not focused on this country, the exceptionalism of this country, putting this country first. And so he resonated, and that call to America First resonated because people want to believe in American greatness. We used to celebrate the Olympics. Right. Now we have people who are, not celebrating this country, and we're sending them as Olympic athletes. Right. We hear how many times from the Talibs and the Omars, we hear from people like Andrew Cuomo from New York. America's never been that great. I mean, we hear over and over and over people from the left, the Democratic Party saying America is bad. And then they break it down from there. America's always been bad. The founding fathers and mothers were bad. Of course, we never did anything good from founding until now. Then it's white people actually are the ones who are the bad. And then we start breaking down, well, it's white men. And then it's the slicing and dicing of this country up into little individual parts. And they are attacking the one thing that makes us exceptional in my book, and that is this. Out of many, one. E pluribus unum is our national motto that makes us exceptional, that says we are a melting pot. Out of all the people from all around the world who come together, bring your diversity of wherever you're from and the food and the language, bring all of that. But at the end of the day, you are an American and you celebrate that Americanness. You rally around the flag. You understand what makes America exceptional. That includes the Constitution. law and order. They're fleeing places that are collapsing. We are an amazing place. And we will continue to be an amazing place so long as we find things that bring us together. And that thing is nationalism. It's that America's great. That is at the heart of the America First movement, is a belief that America is good, that America is exceptional. So that's why I embrace America First. I understand some of the history around those words.
Right.
I'm not a fool. But I think that we can recreate and reimagine what America First means. And I think that data from 2020 election, the most diverse GOP electorate since 1960, that's telling me that what I'm saying right now is right. People want this country to succeed because we know that it's a great place. It is an imperfect union. It's in the Constitution. We're all aware.
Right.
It's our job to make it more perfect. And that's what makes this place so amazing.
Woo, man, that, my friend, is like one of the things that I can't really top. I can't go on a rant like that because it's incredibly articulate. It's amazing, well spoken. I think I got to ask you one more question before we hand this off, which is you're in Gutfeld not too long ago, right?
There we go. Let's do it. Let's tell the story.
We got to tell this Gutfeld story because it was edited out. So I want to hear the Gutfeld joke. Tee it up because it's fucking hilarious.
So I'm not used to being on TV. I'm not a TV guy. I mean, I know I have a beautiful face and all. You know, I'm an actor.
Handsome devil.
So it's a strange thing to go from being a case officer and being away from cameras, and now suddenly you are in front of one. And so I have gotten invited amazingly to different shows. And I talk about politics and national security and all the rest of it, right? So Greg Gutfeld, who is a really funny guy, super nice guy, by the way, he and his staff were gracious enough to invite me to come on a show. So for folks who aren't aware, his show on Fox is this late night comedy show, fantastic ratings, beating the socks off of all of his competitions, the Jimmy Kimmel's, the rest of it, because it's funny. It's a funny show. They talk about news stuff, but they put a funny spin on it. So, a couple hours before the show, I'm in New York and they send the topics, right? One of the topics is a study that shows, that we asked people, men and women, hey, in the workplace, would you entertain an office romance? I mean, obviously you as CEO, you do.
Yeah.
I met like 16-year girlfriends.
Correct. Yeah.
Wait, your wife.
My wife listens to this.
That out.
Yeah, edit that out.
So the ladies in this study said there was like 0% of ladies who were interested in office romance. But dudes, it was like some ungodly number. Like all the dudes were like, yeah, I'm in. And the ladies were like, no.
Yeah.
So that's the what I was sent. I'm like, all right, what can I say that's smart, but also a little bit funny? So here's I'm sitting there and I come up with my talking points and we're at the show. We're filming live to the audience. Greg Gutfeld doesn't know what's about to come. It's going to be good. So he goes around to all the other guests. I'm the last one. And he says, so Bryan, what do you think? I'm like, look, I hear everybody saying something interesting, but really, well, you guys are missing the point here. Think about it. We got a bunch of ladies who are saying no thanks, but millions of men who are ready to go. So what that means, folks, is America's workplace is about to get very gay. So thank you. It's worth a laugh.
It is worth a laugh.
Thank
it's
you. I
hilarious.
see some folks laughing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, am I a comedian? Yes.
Yes.
Am I a hero? Yes. Also.
Yes. Yeah. Both.
So
Twofold.
I tell that joke and it's crickets. It's no one's laughing. I can see across the line. Which, of course, every smart former CIA officer realizes once you read the room, it's disastrous. You just keep going. I mean, obviously, your joke
keep
bombs.
going.
You just say it again, louder.
Louder.
You in a different accent.
Yeah.
So I continue on by saying, don't think about it. Look, gay guys and bi guys, look, good things are happening for you. Shooting fish in a barrel, all right? Bunch of dudes ready to go. But for the straight fellows, I'm going to be honest with you, it's about to get really weird in this country. It's going to get really weird. But the good thing is you have a bunch of other dudes, you can try out your pickup lines, right? So, you go up to Randy in accounting and you're like, hey, Randy, I couldn't help but notice as you were processing my recent trip to Toledo, you beautiful skin and your hair, it's gorgeous and you smell like a daisy. You want to have coffee? Black Rifle, of course.
Black Rifle coffee.
So I tell that joke, and still quiet.
Yeah.
Still nobody laughing on that one. So again, I'm like, well, that just means challenge accepted for round 3. I'm going to keep going.
You win again?
Yeah. Oh, are you kidding me? Like, my joke is like, I'm still dead. And I'm like, no.
No.
Yeah. So I basically, I went again. I don't even remember what I said. And basically, Kat Timpf, who's this lovely, lovely, smart gal, she looks at me and she's like, if any man ever said any of those things to me, I would call the police. To which I looked at her and said, well, I'm going to take you off the to-do list. Again, another terrible joke that crossed the line. So, the asked the producer after the fact. I'm like, so how'd it go? She's like, great. I think it's great. I'm like, how about that last part?
Right.
I didn't want to cross the line. She's like, might have been a little aggressive, but we're going to have the editors take a look, and see what they think. So I watched the show later, and that whole segment was gone. I was edited out. So my comedic career had a glorious start. The first 40 minutes, I was hitting it out of the park.
Smashing it.
Oh,
smashing it.
No, I was hosting the Tonight Show, basically. And then it collapsed. Yeah. And now I'm working Indian casinos with my act.
That's
so
really
I
good.
fell pretty far.
I mean, there's a lot of people that like to frequent Indian.
I work for slot machine coins.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of money in slot machines.
I eat Indian buffets.
Yeah, I do too. Funny enough, so Coeur d'Alene Bingo Casino,
full circle,
right? We're going to go
Idaho.
back to Idaho.
Man, this guy, he should be a host.
So
it's good.
I actually saw Waylon Jennings.
Oh, legend
In the Coeur d'Alene Casino.
Amazing.
Probably a year before he died, or 2.
Does everybody know
whenever
Coeur d'Alene
it was.
North Idaho? Beautiful place. Go visit.
Beautiful place. And it was myself, Luke Benoit. Do you remember that guy?
I don't.
No. And
I wasn't part of the cool crowd.
Kinzer.
That slept with my sister.
No, they were a year below
circle.
me.
Here we go.
Now, I did say this about you earlier, which was the first thing that I asked Bryan was like, how's your sister?
Yeah, you
I
did.
literally was like, how's
literally,
your
I've not
sister?
seen you in 20 years, bro. And within 30 seconds, you asked about my sister.
How's your sister?
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in over 20 years.
Nothing has changed.
I had friends over at my house, and I didn't actually have friends in high school, but they would come over to my house, and I'm not kidding you, my sister would complain that she would be missing underwear when friends would come over.
Mm-hmm. He only let me into his house, I think, one time. And you only let me stay at the front door.
Whatever.
You wouldn't even let me in. You're like, hey, dude,
I'm a loser.
You can't come in here.
Yeah.
One, my house is nice, and you don't look like you should be on the furniture.
Yeah. But you should be a Green Beret.
Yeah.
And we're going to see you someday.
Yeah.
Undercover.
I've come a long way. I'm come a long way. I went from not being let into your house to, putting you
You're
on my...
an international superstar. Podcaster extraordinaire. OnlyFans, guy makes 10, 20 grand a month with that.
Oh, man, I wish.
What you do with a coffee can, I'll tell you what.
Dude. Bryan, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
That concludes today's training. Any questions?